My name is Evie Farguson. I am one of the folks here, obviously, and I identify as Afro-Latina. And I guess I'll let the other two introduce themselves as well. If you want to go ahead, Candida.
Yeah, I'm Candida. My pronouns are she, her, and ella, and I identify as Afro-Caribeña only because I don't like the word Latina, but I am also Afro-Latinx.
Cool, and my name is Tino, and I see my own positionality in a little more complex ways, but I typically work with Afrodescendiente or Afro descent, and there's a lot of other lineages that come into there, specifically like Northern, South American Indigenous, Mesquitia in Central America and others. But yeah, that's who I am, and yeah.
Great, thank you. And so just to let you all who are out there listening know, we are looking at representations of AfroLatinidad, but we're going to be having actually a conversation about real life experiences, not necessarily the academic focus of AfroLatinidad, partly because a lot of what's missing in kind of this new academic wave of Afro-Latinx studies is what's actually happening with people, right? The real life experiences. And so I'd like to start off the conversation really just talking about something that stuck with me. I'm 45 years old. I'm originally from Boston. My parents are Costa Ricans, and they were born and raised in Costa Rica. And they immigrated to the United States. I was born, went to school. And in the sixth grade, for reasons that I cannot explain, because I don't know what the reasons were, my sixth grade teacher decided to do a racial survey of the class. And I don't know why she did it, because everybody, I mean, there were probably 30 students in the class, everybody else was white. There was no, in essence, there was no need to do the survey. But anyway, she did. And she went through and asked, how many of you identify as white? Or no, not even how many of you identify as, how many of you are white? And everybody in the class raised their hands. And she said, how many of you are Black? And I raised my hand. And she said, how many of you are Hispanic, which was the term at the time? And I raised my hand. And she came to me and she was like, you can't be both. You're going to have to choose. And then the other kids in the class discussed which was cooler. Like someone was like, no, to be Black is cooler. No, go ahead and choose Hispanic because nobody wants to be Black. I mean, it was this discussion around me with me not basically learning that I was going to have to choose, like, and other people were determining for me like what that identity was. And that's stuck with me for up until I even recognized that Afro-Latino was Afro-Latinx was even an option. I never knew that until well into my 30s. And there was a lot of pain around this idea that I had to choose because it didn't just come from that white teacher, right? Like for the rest of my teenage existence and certainly in college, when I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill as an undergrad, there was this sense of like, no, what are you? You need to draw your line in the sand. Where's the line? What are you trustworthy or not, in essence, which is very painful. It was a soul searching experience because I am obviously Black. I've never not been proud of that fact. My parents are certainly not, but they've always been proud of that fact. And I have identified as Latina also my whole life. I mean, again, that's something my parents are proud of. So it's in and out of my culture, in and out of my home. I mean, it's just a part of who everyone in my family is. So having to choose, or people saying, well, no, you're not trustworthy, or giving the sense that you're not trustworthy has been eye-opening, painful, soul-searching, expressive experience that continues all the time. So I just wanted to open up the discussion with that story to let people know, like, this is beyond just kind of the trend of using a term for academia. People are actually living these experiences? So I'm interested in the two of you of what your experiences are or what you have to say kind of about this.
Yeah, like I think that's interesting. Like my experience, I don't claim AfroLatinidad, right? Because I passed as a certain like ambiguous figure. Like I can be racially ambiguous and that's a really big privilege on my side in terms of what I could be and how I can act. But my history, I think my family's history has always been like, so we have this Black woman in our family, our grandmother in Honduras, on the coast of Honduras, La Ceiba, which has always been historically viewed as a very like dark place. Like this is a place where dark people exist, whether they be Garifuna, from the local like indigenous folks there, or they be what they oftentimes call Native Islander, or like descendants of enslaved people there who mix with local peoples and so on, right? And so even in my own family, there's been this like discussion about like, why don't we recognize abuelita as a Black woman, right? And she owns that. Like she says like, yeah, when I was a kid, like, cause she was, her parents were killed and in an incident that happened a while back, and she was given to another family, a white skinned Honduran family. And she's like, yeah, when I was a kid, they beat me, they made fun of me, they did all this because I had curly, kinky hair and I was dark skinned. And so like her Blackness was very visible in that sense. And yet when she married a man from Spain, Galicia specifically, from northern Spain, and he had children with her, and she had these kids who, like my father specifically, who never really valorized that. Like somos españoles, we are from Spanish descent, and it's like, yo, there's like this other, wait, hold up, there's this other side to you. Like, why don't you speak to that side? Well, Spain is like the crux of civilization, so especially in Latin America, right? So my positionality comes from there, and to be honest with you, in the last 4 to 3 years, I have done a really serious search of like trying to discover those roots, right? Like I would go back to Honduras every summer and be like, hey, I want to know who you are, abuelita. I want to find out what's going on. And so my lived experience is not so much of AfroLatinidad or Blackness. It is searching to connect to some form of that in our past and give voice to it, but to not hide it or marginalize it. And so that's kind of my connection. And I think it's interesting because like, I think especially as someone like myself, like a lot of mestizo, mulatto, mestizo, Latinos, whatever you want to call them, I include myself in that. Like we have an obligation to like confront that or to bring it to light and then deal with that, because that really shouldn't just rest on like Black Latinos or like Black Latinx folks in our communities, or Afro Latinx folks, however they want to refer themselves, but that really should also come on us too. So that's kind of like why I feel like I like to be involved in these discussions. So.
Hey, so my experience, and fair warning, there is a 3-year-old in the space, so you might hear her singing. But my experience is the reason why I don't like the word Latinx or Latina or whatever you want to say, and why I don't identify with that term. I grew up here in Utah. My family moved out here when I was 7. Can't really claim anything else. But I come from a very Dominican household. And in 1999 in Utah, there really weren't many people who were Latinx who looked like me here. And because of that, I was never accepted within like the Latinx community. And I grew up in Glendale. If you know Glendale, Glendale's very diverse. You got a little bit of everything in there. But growing up, my Latinx side, my Latinidad, was erased by everyone in the community. They did not see me as one of them. But then I remember like I was like 14, like a good 7 years later, when most of the kids who I'd grown up with found out that I spoke Spanish, I was suddenly welcomed. But then the Black part of me was erased. So it was very confusing, and I had a very hard time with that growing up and into like high school. And it wasn't until college that I really found how I wanted to identify, because prior to that, I spent so much time wanting to be accepted by the other Latinx kids, because there weren't many Black kids around me. It wasn't until like middle school and high school that I had more Black friends. So like I spent a lot of time just trying to show who I was. And it's like, no, I'm Dominican, I'm Latina, I speak Spanish. But then it wasn't until I was a little older that I realized that what I was doing was erasing part of myself, the same way that other Latinx people in my community were erasing a part of me, by me wanting to make sure that they understood that I was first and foremost Latina and before Black, was actually very damaging even to myself, because when people see me, it's clear that I'm mixed. Like they know, it's like, you're not full anything. You're mixed with something, and part of that is Black. So it wasn't until in college when I really started to think about my own identity and how I wanted to identify, because I always knew I was Black. I always knew I was Latinx. I mean, that was very clear, but I didn't know how I wanted to represent that and how to identify. So it wasn't until I was in college really that I came up with, I wanted to be known as Afro-Caribeña, because when it comes down to it, being from the Dominican Republic, I'm very different than other people from Latin America. Like Latin America is not a monolith. Like there's people from like so many different cultures. There are similarities, but not even Spanish, because not every country in Latin America speaks Spanish. So I realized like I really resonate more with people from the Caribbean. So I'm going to identify as Caribeña, and I'm going to say it in Spanish to make it clear that I come from a Spanish speaking Caribbean country. But it was very hard growing up with this, because when you look like me, or when you are Afro-Latinx, or whatever you want to call it, when you are from a Latin American country and you're Black, and you aren't in a community where people are very used to seeing people who look like you and people from your countries, you're kind of forced to look at your own identity and to navigate that. There isn't like really space for you to think about that later. It's like you're forced into it at a young age. You're kind of forced to look into, okay, well, what are you going to identify as? So that was my experience. I'm not sure if I explained it very well, but I'm going to stop talking so that we can have a discussion about all of our experiences and learn from each other.
Yeah, Candida, you know, you're saying something that's so interesting and true. Like, so like I grew up in an area of the country, I mean, the city itself, not New England itself, because New England is a very white space, but Boston's pretty diverse. But the concept of Latinx people being Black, and I would argue with that also the Asian Latinx population, which is very, very much in existence. It's almost as if the Latinidad of these populations are completely erased, right? The idea is that, wait, are you Black? Because that really is going to determine how I'm going to treat you. It's almost like, and so when you're not that, but then you look, when you're like, no, I'm Black, and then they're like, oh, so then your experience is like African American. It's like, no, that's not my experience. Like my experience is actually very much like yours. If you're talking to somebody who's Latinx, there is this sense sometimes of like, even though I said this, I didn't want to make it an academic discussion. There's certain academic evidence of it, of a lot of pressure from, or a lot of erasure from other Latinos, from Latinx people to Black, and I would add Asian experiences as well, of not being true Latinos, you know, like, so of saying like, no, I'm a descendant of the slaves from Latin America, right? The slaves went to all over the Western Hemisphere, and African slaves went to Costa Rica, and both of my parents are descendants, myself and my brother and my sister were descendants of those people. That almost has to then acknowledge, number one, that there's racism in Latin America, and that there's a racial hierarchy in Latin America, and that there was slavery in Latin America, which makes the critique what can make the critique of the US seem difficult to maintain. I think there's this feeling, oh, you're bringing up stuff, you're bringing up our dirty laundry. It's almost like, no, you got to be on our side because we don't want them to know that we are just as racist towards, we're just as anti-Black in Latin America as people are in North America or Europe or Asia or wherever. And that's, I think, I mean, I really believe that's where part of the core of erasure for Black Latinos comes from, is the sense of always this questioning. And I would argue with the benefit that both you and Tino have is that you have what are called Latino last names, right? And so there's this sense when you don't have one, then there's really people just don't have the understanding of the history at all, right? Like when people ask me, they're like, oh, which one of your parents is Latinx? I'm like, well, both of them. Well, how is that possible? Your name is Ferguson. I'm like, well, it's possible because, you know, imperialism, that's how it's possible. It's possible because of colonialism. Like it's possible because that is truly the Latinx experience. If you look at history, is looking at these European powers going in and colonizing anybody and everybody. And so it's a good reminder too of Latinx people of all backgrounds having to really have a truth and reconciliation commission almost of looking at like, yeah, we were enslaved people too. Like our countries and our families are anti-Black too. And they're wanting us to whiten up, you know, the family and to straighten our hair and do all these things. And we're doing that too, before there can ever be any progress, I think, in accepting everybody.
Yeah, I really want to just because you brought it up, and I'm so glad you brought it up, that like, and this is one of the reasons why I don't like the word Latinidad or Latinx or whatever you want to call it. It's because it gives you this like false sense of unity within the Latinx community. It makes it seem like we're all unified. There is no racism within the Latinx community, but it's crap. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the other word, because hello, all of Latin America was colonized. There are colonizers living there right now. There are Black people living there right now. There are Asian people. It's like, you really need to think of Latin America the same that you look at the US. Like there are people from all over the country there by choice and because they were forced to be there because they were enslaved. So our histories are very similar. We just tend to not talk about it in our history books. It's part of the erasure of Blackness within Latin America. And that's why you have so many people who are so confused when they see a Black person who speaks Spanish, and it's really, it kind of is their fault, but it really isn't at the same time, because Latin America has done such a good job at erasing Black people from history, even though there's a whole Black person walking right next to you in every country in Latin America.
Those dynamics are like really fascinating because like I grew up, so I was like this Honduran Ecuadorian kid growing up in a Dominican neighborhood, right, in Brooklyn. And so like my habits became un poco Dominicano, like my speech patterns, like all these things, right? And but I notice the comments. I noticed particularly from parents, to be honest with you, who were mostly from the island, and these kids growing up trying to like figure that out. And like this idea of Haiti and then the Dominican Republic, and those dynamics are super. Yeah, Canada, you're like yeah, because you know what I'm talking about. You know, like that is visibly complex. You know, and when I would go to the Dominican Republic, it's kind of like I link it to what I see also in Mexico and Honduras. When I see in the cities, like there's a visible distinction about who are the haves and who are the have-nots. You know, like in some parts of Honduras and some parts of Mexico, indigenous people are the have-nots. Like they are specifically like pushed at a certain societal level. And then in the DR, was kind of seeing like Haitians kind of like trying to eke out a living in a place that was very Spanish dominant, right? And so like even seeing that in my own personal life, like how my dad would tell me like, oh, we got to straighten your hair, because it's like a legacy of like something does want, he chooses not to like listen to, you know? And that's a difficult thing. Like, how do you uproot something so deeply rooted? That's a great question. And I don't know if yeah, that's just a thought I have.
I think there is a way to do it. And I've really been thinking about this for like 15 years, you know, like, because I would argue kind of that there's plenty of, I mean, like if you go to any of the countries in Latin America, just take a look at the leadership, right? They're white. and they're typically outnumbered in terms of demographics. Well, they have to maintain, to maintain their power, they have to continue this anti-Blackness and anti-Indigenous and anti-Asiatic sentiment. And I don't mean it in a conspiracy theory way. I mean, I think when you see, it's just so blatant. It's so blatant in terms of who gets hired. I mean, I'm thinking about Panama, where I lived for 4 or 5 years. And you know, in Panama, with your resume, you have to attach a picture. So when you apply for a job, you have to have a picture, you know, your picture along with the resume. And there's only one reason for that, you know, so that they can see what you look like to decide if you could get this job or not. And that's a clear institutional marker of making sure that other people are not, you know, the people you don't want in there aren't going to get hired. And so I think there are some things that you can do, but I think it almost has to come institutionally first. Like, all right, we're not going to require that you give us a photograph of you with your resume. We're not going to require that, which is key. I mean, that in itself does so much. I mean, could you imagine doing that in the United States? And I'm sure there are plenty of people who would love to do that, but you can't, right? Except for visual jobs. And you're not going to have to, you know, you don't have to tell us what neighborhood of the city you live in, you know, like in order to get a job. I mean, things like that almost institutionally can be cut out first, so that people are then all of a sudden working with people who they never have before, as opposed to the reverse. I mean, I think a lot of digging it out from the human being, we know this everywhere, right? Digging it out from, asking someone to voluntarily change is very insanely difficult, right? That change has to come through some level of force for a minute before they're like, oh. I think about the number of times I've heard somebody say, or my in-laws for that matter. I mean, like the number of times I hear somebody say like, oh, you know, this guy at work, I was talking with him, and, you know, he's a Black guy, but he's really nice, you know, like, oh, but you know, but he's really funny. Or, you know, yeah, he's Mexican, but I'm telling you, he's really cool. Like this sentiment, these insanely racist statements also are opening people's eyes, like, oh, they're living just like me. And that, I think, has to come institutionally first. But I do go back and forth oftentimes on like, does it need to come from the person themselves or the personal experience, or does it need to go institutionally? Right now I'm institutional because there are so many institutional markers that, in the US and in Latin America, and they're all very similar in preventing anyone from growing to become anti-racist. Because even if you were anti-racist, you're going to go to work and you're going to have somebody give you a picture of what they look like in a resume. You're going to go to work and you're going to have a textbook that's going to not allow you to teach slavery because it's not in the textbook. You're going to have, which is purchased by the government, right?
I think
but I did want to say one other thing though. I mean, I think you get also a sense of like what people do and don't know about Latin America, at least, because I feel like at least there's a sense that there's some kind of Blackness in Hispaniola, like there's some kind of Blackness in the Dominican. You know, if there's outside of like the Dominican and Puerto Rico, Cuba to an extent, there's just this a complete erasure of Blackness. So when they're like, oh, you know, like me, I'm like, oh, my family's from Costa Rica. They're like, wait, Costa Ricans are white. And I was like, no, Costa Rica is like the United States. I mean, it's like there were people from, it was colonized. It's a mix of, there were slaves. But there's just a complete disconnect of an understanding of what the people, who the people are in Latin America, totally, I would argue.
I want to say that another problem that I see, and another reason why I don't like the word Latinidad or Latinx and this false sense of unity, is that one of the ways that they erase actual Black people is by saying that we are all mixed, that we all have a little bit of Black, we all have a little bit of Indigenous in us, we all have a little bit of European in us, which is so not true. And like, are you telling me that that person walking down the street with a blonde hair and blue eyes is part Black and part Indigenous too? And they have like a very European name? Like, no, stop. Like, I understand that there are white passing people and this is not to invalidate them, but this whole, we're all a third of each mentality is really used to uplift more white people in Latin America and to not give space or acknowledgement to the Black people. And then there's also colorism that is a big problem with it, where you see people who look like me or even lighter as like the face of AfroLatinidad, and you completely erase all of the full Black people. They look at mixed people as like, oh, that's all the Afro-Latinx people that we have. And it's like, no, there are full Black people who are Black and they cannot deny their Blackness at any point in their lives. I think those are two ways that they do it very well in Latin America that I don't see it as often here in the US, that they just like erase Blackness and uplift whiteness. And that's why we have this problem, because we're still like attached to this like unity and not acknowledging that there are people who look very differently in every country, and there are people from all over the world in every country.
I think those are some really, really, really good and strong points. And I think recently you're starting to see some thought and like recognition of some of these ideas, particularly within like the diaspora in the US, right? With like people who've come out of their homelands, whether by force or by seeking a better life, whatever you want to call it, you can call it all force. Coming into contact with other communities and other groups and like learning and like wait, like how processes of racialization really are been the same as in the US too. And so like I think a lot of this idea of like anti-racist work, it sounds like it's solidified within institutions. Like, how do we confront institutions in a way that addresses policies that impact certain communities? And I think that's still, people are still trying to identify that, like within Afro, like descendant or like Afro-Latinx communities, because like it barely, like, folks were going hard on immigration before, like immigration, like resistance work and like activism. And then it came to light, like, yo, like there's Black Latinx folks that are getting deported as well. And how come we're not addressing that? And for the longest time, people like in the Southeast, especially, like folks from Haiti to DR and other countries have been trying to, like, there's been deportations there amongst that community in strong numbers. And that has gone overlooked for how long now, right? Like it's just barely surfacing, and we're barely, I would argue we're not even still like engaging that conversation, or even within like indigeneity, like in Honduras specifically, the Garifuna, which is it's a tribe of people there, but they are visibly like Black Latinx people, but they wouldn't call themselves that. They call themselves Garifuna people or Garinagu. And they're going through land eraser right now. Like we have the enduring government trying to take away their land for corporate interests, right? To sell for tourism industries and things like that. So it's almost as if like this issue becomes both like settler in context, but also anti-Black too. And maybe that's the same. That's maybe a conversation. That's a big conversation, to be honest. But like, it is yeah, because like, I don't know. I'm just thinking like the conversations are just starting to come out, and people that look like me, people even like I would argue white Latinos need to come to terms with that and have that conversation amongst themselves. And don't even get me started with the Cubans in Florida. That's a whole nother like panorama of like racial complexity. Yeah.
But I think that, I mean, that what you're talking about is also similar to what's happening with the AfroColombianos, right? I mean, they've been fighting with the government for their lands, and they're continually getting it taken away. They have what is now deemed, forever it was deemed that the land that wasn't valuable, but now it is valuable. So then they got to get off it. I mean, which is the same old story, throughout the Americas for African descendant and indigenous people. Like, now your land is valuable, you got to go. So, but I think that there's also this sense of like, the social media has done a lot, I think, to have people connect with each other. I mean, I think when I see that I can be here in Salt Lake City and come across like Afro-Latinx celebrations, or some group of Afro-Mexicanos who are, fighting hard and trying to organize people in Mexico, some, Afro-Central Americans trying to be recognized by the government and the United States, Afro-Latinx people who are trying to remind people that Black people are also being deported, Black Latinx people. I mean, social media has helped in that way. But I think what we tend to forget is like, there's always been in Latin America, Black people who are proud and happy and love being Black and celebrate their Blackness, despite the constant erasure. I mean, like, I used to, and then you grow up thinking that didn't exist because you don't learn about them and you don't hear about them, and you're just like, well, that's the big difference between the United States. There was a Black and beautiful movement here, and there wasn't a Black and no, like there was, and there are people who have been like, yeah, I'm Black, soy negro, soy negra, soy negra bella, soy negra, whatever, and this is me. And you're gonna have to take it. And those people, to me, have always been the most beautiful, inside, outside, whatever, and the most powerful. Like this, they are constantly fighting up against. I'm thinking of somebody like Celia Cruz to a point, right? Like, how, especially early on, when you listen to her songs early on, and just how much she's trying to take, like, how happy she is to be Black, to music. And the fact that people can try to act like, no, it's different because she was famous. We can bring her in the home because she's got such a beautiful voice and powerful voice, and listening to white Cubans say, no, she's our music. That's our music. Not really like that. She's talking about how happy and beautiful she is to be Black, and to bring, the cultura africana to music, and you wouldn't even bring her in your house, like you wouldn't even, like, if somebody looked like her, you wouldn't even have them like in your house or marry in your family. I mean, like, so stop faking the funk. I always argue, but still, I mean, I feel like there's celebrating those people and digging those people out, knowing history. I mean, the experience I had with my teacher in the 6th grade is why I started really digging into Afro-Latinx history, first in Costa Rica, but in elsewhere too, to really start looking at like, yeah, like we've been here, we've been doing amazing stuff. I'm with Canida though, even though I'm also light skinned, although no one ever thinks that I'm mixed in any way. I'm really disturbed by this trend of having like AfroLatinidad being represented, I guess, as anybody who as trendy and like light skinned folk, and not paying attention to, like, again, the negro bellos who are who've been around, who are doing serious work. So those are just my comments for the next.
And like Canida spoke truth right there. Like, I mean, the 1/3 argument, that is intentional. That is strategic. That is intentional. That is how you keep a population from acknowledging like the variations within their communities. And like, it's how you also hide inequality, right? It's how you keep it like, no, todos somos, we're all Costa Ricans, we're all Panamanians, we're all Dominicans. Like we are, no, if it's poverty, it's because you just don't have money. Like, no, there's a racialized aspect to why people are suffering, right? And so I think here, like I look at here in Utah specifically, I lived in Utah for almost, this place kidnapped me a minute ago. Seriously, I've been here since I was 20, so 15 years. I've been here for 15 years. And even within among students, like Latinx students, you know, that knowledge is not known. You know, it's like no different than amongst white community members, right? Like amongst white people here. Like that education needs to happen on a whole nother level, but it's not. I don't know if it ever will, to be honest. Not even in our colleges do we have like curriculum and syllabi in place to sometimes do things like that. It's got to be like intercepted and interjected. But it happens on a community level when people like Canida and others like are actually having these conversations and hosting them, you know. So it's just interesting, how do we like impact that? Like how do we move forward or move somewhere? I argue that sometimes we have to move backwards in that regard, like backwards in the sense of ourselves, like in the sense of our own Latinx, quote unquote, because I hate that word too, Canida. It's not a fun word. Moving backwards into our community and having those really intense, uncomfortable conversations.
I would say that's not even moving backwards, right? I mean, but I think you're right. I mean, I think it's calling people out in the moment. Like, you know, when a common thing, right? Somebody dark skinned comes on TV. Ay, mira esta fea. Mira esta, you know, like being like, why is she fea? Mira, ay, qué feo este. Why? Like what? Or even question like, why are all the maids indigenous on this telenovela? Why, you know, why is it okay for reggaeton to be okay when it's Bad Bunny and J Balvin, but when it was when they were all the Black people who were doing it, why was it like gangster music that you didn't even want to listen to? Like why is that okay? And so I think it's, and calling people out too who are Black. I mean, they're clearly Black and are like, oh, yo no soy negro, yo soy boricua, yo soy dominicana. You said, no. What's wrong with being Black? Like, why don't you want to be Black? I mean, I think it's really presenting people with these questions. And what's made me think that is what's going on in Mexico, right? Like the Afro-Mexicanos who have been there for hundreds of years. I mean, when you look at the information, I mean, Mexico City was once majority Black, and that whole history is gone, right? That whole history, like, I mean, I don't know how many times people would say to me growing up, oh, no, you know, like, there's no Black people in Mexico. There's no Black. Like, no, there certainly are. There's over 1 million Black people in Mexico. And having those people argue and fight and demand, all right, well then let's put it on the poll. Let's put it on the census and see if there's nobody here, right? And I think that that's calling people out from individual to even your government is one step. And prepare for the family to be like, you know, what's wrong with you? See, you've been in this country too long. You know, like it's just, you're starting to care too much about those things. You know, we don't do that in our country. And just kind of remind you, like, no, we do it so well that you can get away with saying we don't do it. That's how well it's been done.
I'm with you. It's about the accountability. Sharing from my personal experience, being Dominican, I mean, we're messy. Dominicans are messy. It's very problematic and it's very complex, like the relationship between Haiti and the DR. But being that I am Dominican, both my parents are Dominican, my dad's Black, my mom is Hava, so she has Black in her, but she looks white. And they had 5 children, and all 5 of us are a different shade and have different hair texture. And I can't say I'm the only one now, because my little sister's now starting to accept that she is also Black, but very white passing. But for the longest time, I was the only one who accepted and like centered and loved my Blackness out of my siblings. And it's because I wasn't the only one, but I couldn't hide the Blackness that is in me because of my features and the way that I look. Because I have a sister who is very pale, and she passed with all the other Latinx because she was very much loved and accepted. And then I have another sister who's darker than me, but her hair is less curly. And she and I were the ones who had the hardest time. And most of our friends were Somali refugees here in Utah. And then like the few Black kids who started moving into our neighborhood. And then like my youngest sister is like Hawa too. She's pale, with curly hair. And she basically is very passing as like anything but Black. But it's been a battle with me and my family for like the last 10 years. And every time I'm talking about our Blackness, being told, you're not Black. And I'm like, look at Dad. Our father is a Black man. What are you talking about? And I've continued these conversations, and like it's gotten to the point where it's sticking with some of my siblings where they're like, oh wait, no, we are part Black. Like we do have Black in us. We just come from a country that has a really good job at erasing Blackness and telling us that Black is bad and Black is Haitian, and that everyone who's not Dominican but Black is anything but Black. You've come up with different names for it. You just come up with a different name and that's what you are, but you're not Black. But like I've seen that change within my own family and within my own communities and like my circles. So I like what Evie said, it's really, I think a lot of it has to be done internally, because I mean, AfroLatinidad, that it's not a new concept. It's been around forever. There's always been people who've been shouting that they're Afro-Latinx, that have been proud and just celebrating their Blackness. But if we're not holding those around us accountable and calling out the anti-Blackness within our communities, then we're going to continue having people defending J-Lo for calling her La Negrita de Bronx just recently. We're going to continue to have these conversations where people are defending her and saying that's a term of endearment. And it's like, but where did that term of endearment come from? And is it being used appropriately here? Yeah, just wanted to say, yeah, accountability is such a big part of it.
I don't know when this thing is supposed to be over, because we could just keep talking about this forever. Seriously, I forgot what time it's done. Do any of y'all know it? 3.
Yeah,
okay.
We're so we've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay. I gotta peace out right now. but I appreciate being in this conversation with both of y'all, because I think like there's room and space to talk about it in really interesting, complex, and even uncomfortable ways. And like even my own journey of understanding has been really uncomfortable, in the sense of acknowledging who I am, acknowledging how messy roots are, like the messy roots that I have. And but also that like I think for me it was this willingness to just explore my grandmother's story and love it and appreciate it for what she brought into our family. And just trying to make it light. Like when I talk to my sons, I tell them like, Mira, like you guys come, this is the family you come from. This is the roots you have, you know, like your mom is Black Latina as well from the DR, like love and be those roots, you know, and don't let anyone put you in the boxes that people have always done, right? Y'all's stories have been about boxes that people have tried to put you in, right? And I think that's the biggest thing we share with our children, with those in the future, with students, is like boxes is total white supremacy.
Yep.
Colonialism and white supremacy. And I just don't fuck with boxes. Sorry, I wasn't sure I was supposed to say that. Okay, I'm gonna be out. My bad. All right, peace out, y'all.
Cool. Thank you, Tino. Thank you. I think we can open up for questions too, if people have any questions, because otherwise Candida and I can keep on talking about this stuff for hours. I mean, it's you go on forever.
You have all the time to talk about it because you're forced to learn all you can about the topic to be able to understand your identity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't see any questions, so we can keep on moving on to, if you have a question, then go ahead and you can, I guess, raise your hand or unmute yourself, because I didn't mute anybody. You know, one of the things I've been thinking about recently, and I've actually written about this, not academically, just the very American, and I use that for the whole North America, South America, Central America, aspect of, you know, anything Afro is okay in sports, right? Like, if you're playing baseball, we got you. We're gonna support you. We're gonna be with you. If you're on our football team, we got you. We're there with you. And they're representing us. You know, now all of a sudden, you know, all these Afro-Dominicanos who are playing baseball, now we're Dominicanos, you know, somos Dominicanos. Now we're highlighting, we're excited. When, I mean, Brazil is doing this perfectly, right? Like, and has done it. Like, we're not going to allow Black people to have many rights, but who's our famous Brazilian soccer player hero is Pele, right? Like, that is, you know, this idea of the space where it is okay to be Black is in athletics or in music to a point, but definitely on the baseball, basketball, and soccer fields. And that's specifically for the men. You know, if you're a woman, there was never really this space to be okay and comfortable with where people were comfortable with your Blackness. And I don't know if you experienced that. I know I've experienced that.
I agree with that. I mean, I think the only exception to that is Celia Cruz. She's really our only Black woman from Latin America who is celebrated. If you look at history, like, where else? And even just today, you don't have to look at history. Look at today with, like, Amara La Negra.
Yeah.
She's been trying to make it for who knows how long in both Latin America and in the US. And every moment in her career, she has been questioned or ridiculed.
Yep.
And then you look at, like, Cardi B, who is making it in the US, but is always questioned about her Latin identity and how Dominican she is. Mm-hmm. And then you look at, I mean, reggaeton, you already brought it up. Who are the stars of reggaeton right now, even though this was created by Black people in Panama? Mm-hmm. You've got Maluma, who is racist.
Yeah.
And you've got
way to describe it.
You've got Spaniards coming in. You've got white Latin Americans. But yeah, I'm with you. I think, like in the US, the most disrespected person is the Black woman. Mm-hmm. In Latin America as well. And like, not even me, I read as a mixed, racially ambiguous person. So that's my identity. But Black people who cannot hide their Blackness, Black women who cannot hide their Blackness, who live the life of a Black woman, have it the hardest and are the most disrespected.
And I would argue also highly erased. I mean, like, there's just no vision at all. Like, no, just, we don't want you to be seen at all.
Want your features, but we don't want to see them.
Right. And we don't want you, like, you can take care of our kids and raise them and cook for us, but in the kitchen and in the back when nobody, you know, can see it. And I mean, I challenge everybody who's here to really take a look at our cultures, right? Our cultures, and see where the anti-Blackness is. Because first of all, understanding it's there, right? It's there. So to kind of get over any kind of defensiveness that may pop up of, like, oh, well, we don't do that, right? It's like, we don't do that in my family. We don't do that in our, no, we all do it. So where is it? Where where is that anti-Blackness? And starting there, because one of the things is once you see it, it's hard to unsee. You got to do a lot of work to unsee something you now can pay attention to and see everywhere. And it becomes really, really painful because you'll be pushing it away if you're unseeing it. Like you're making an effort to unsee it.
I want to tell everyone on here to go and check out on Twitter, Bad Dominicana. She has been, no hay más chocolates, camina para allá, por favor. Just go look at her. She has for the longest time been actively talking about this topic and about the erasure of Black women in Latin America and how they're treated and where they're accepted and where they're not accepted. It's Bad Dominicana. And she uses the word bad not as in like I'm a baddie, it's more like she's a bad Dominican because she's calling this out. I highly recommend that you go and check her out because she has been at this for over 10 years and talking about this topic for a really long time. I know we're running out of time, but that was just one thing I wanted to make sure I said before we finished.
You can also take a look on Twitter at all of there's a lot of stuff going on, hashtag AfroLatinx, hashtag AfroLatina. You can take a look at all the festivals that are going on, all the young people who are, and I say young people because I'm 45, but all the young people who are organizing, all of the celebrations happening in different countries and within the diaspora. I mean, you really, really can connect with people and learn a lot from everybody that's on hashtag AfroLatinx or hashtag AfroLatina. Another thing to look at is take a look at these people like Amara La Negra and Gloria Peña out of Harvard and these people who are just out there who are like, no, you're gonna have to, like, I'm not in your box. You're gonna have to deal with it. Like those. I mean, that's why one of the reasons why I love Amara La Negra. She's like, whether she's talking with African Americans and they're like, wait, what are you doing? And she's like, I don't care. Like, this is me. Like, really. And that's why I love Cardi too, because Cardi gets a lot of stuff from other groups of people who are like, oh, she's not really Black. And she's just like, you know what? Like, I expect you to understand that, yes, I'm like, and people that look like me are Black. Like we've been hiding it, but we're still Black. I mean, I think that there's effort in following those people and looking at their stuff.
Yeah, highly recommend just expanding who you follow and who you get your education from, because when you look at institutions and like education, you're not going to get the full story, because a lot of Black Latinx people have been like, they haven't been allowed into these spaces to have these conversations. I'm distracted by the toddler.
Yeah, no, I mean, to continue on with what, I mean, like, you won't find a lot of these things in institutions, including the U, right? Like you won't find it because there's really not a lot of people doing this work at the U. They're not, those voices aren't allowed in institutions. You have to kind of go through the box checking to get to the point where you're in an institution. So just kind of checking out. I mean, social media to me is where I find a whole bunch of other people to network with and to find out like, hey, where did you read that? Or, what book are you reading? Like, there's a book right now, the Dominican Racial Imaginary, right? And it's really, really good to kind of get through what Candida's talking about, like the nuances and the complexities of race in the Dominican Republic, not in a way that apologizes for it either. That is just like, no, all right, here it is. This is what it is, as a way to fight it out. So it is 3:01. So we have completed our time here today. Thank you guys for coming. Thank everyone for coming. Thanks, Candida. And thank your little girl there for letting us.
You almost made it to the end. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, that was a long time. Thank you to everyone, and enjoy your weekend.
Yeah, thank you so much for sticking around with us and listening to our experiences.